Let's pray. Dear gracious Father in heaven, again, we come to you assembled around your word. Thank you for the promise that it will produce results. Thank you for the book of Proverbs, which makes us think about the importance of wisdom, true wisdom, spiritual wisdom, and how to pursue the things that are of lasting value here on this earth, things that will last into eternity. Be with us in our study this evening. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. 15 and 16, some more advice for living a righteous life. We get into 16 after the first couple of verses, kind of a shift just in the kind of writing. Normally you have this contrast between first part of the verse contrasted then by the second part. We're going to find that stopping, and when we go to 16 to 22, for the most part, you're going to have both parts of each verse pretty much supporting the same thing. So we're going to go through 15 first of all, and read through that, and again, pull out some key phrases, I imagine, or most of it's covered in the discussion questions. So let me pull it up in case you want to follow along with me, or else in your own Bible. Proverbs 15, verse 1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise commends knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. The tongue that brings healing is a tree of life, but a deceitful tongue crushes the spirit. A fool spurns his father's discipline, but whoever heeds correction shows prudence. The house of the righteous contains great treasure, but the income of the wicked brings them trouble. The lips of the wise spread knowledge, not so the hearts of fools. Verse 8, the Lord detests the sacrifice of the wicked, but the prayer of the upright pleases him. The Lord detests the way of the wicked, but he loves those who pursue righteousness. Stern discipline awaits him who leaves the path. He who hates correction will die. Death and destruction lie open before the Lord. How much more the hearts of men? A mocker resents correction. He will not consult the wise. A happy heart makes the face cheerful, but heartache crushes the spirit. The discerning heart seeks knowledge, but the mouth of a fool feeds on folly. All the days of the oppressed are wretched, but the cheerful heart has a continual feast. Better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. Better a meal of vegetables where there is love than a fattened calf with hatred. A hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel. The way of the sluggard is blocked with thorns, but the path of the upright is a highway. Verse 20, a wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish man despises his mother. Folly delights a man who lacks judgment, but a man of understanding keeps a straight course. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. A man finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good is a timely word. The path of life leads upward for the wise to keep him from going down to the grave. The Lord tears down the proud man's house, but he keeps the widow's boundaries intact. The Lord detests the thoughts of the wicked, but those of the pure are pleasing to him. A greedy man brings trouble to his family, but he who hates bribes will live. The heart of the righteous weighs its answers, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. A cheerful look brings joy to the heart, and good news gives health to the bones. He who listens to a life-giving rebuke will be at home among the wise. He who ignores discipline despises himself, but whoever heeds correction gains understanding. The fear of the Lord teaches a man wisdom, and humility comes before honor. Any of those jump out at you as plaque worthy? And if I can use that terminology, that maybe you could see it on a plaque hanging in your home or on your desk or somewhere prominent that you would see.
Kind of like the humility comes before honor one.
The very last one.
Yeah, kind of once
Humility,
in a while, I've
yeah.
been known to say a little something completely engaged. Or unfortunately it was engaged and I said it anyway,
You said it anyway. So
yeah.
you're looking at that as a nice reminder.
Yeah, just stay humble.
Yeah, that's a good one. Luke, you got one? Luke?
Yeah, verse 17. Even Solomon knew that vegetables were bad.
I didn't specifically think of you, Luke, but I thought of that topic about, the comparison that even if you get stuck with vegetables, if there's love there, then it's better than what most of us would want to have, the fattened calf. So you saw through that too, saying the vegetables are seen as a bad thing. So anyone else? Let's look at our sheets that we have. I have those also if you don't have them in front of you. Advice for living a righteous life. In verse 3, we have one of those anthropomorphisms. Is that right? Probably confused a couple consonants. Where you ascribe human features to God, such as when you say the hands or feet of God, here the eyes of the Lord. Simply says, since God is a spirit, he does not have eyes, but the Bible frequently uses this kind of language to make God's actions and attributes clear to us. Here, his eyes indicate that he knows what is going on in our lives. I read something a while back that we're always quick to say, yeah, we understand God is a spirit and that he is just using human language to help us understand the point that he's making. But I had someone once say, do you think that maybe as far as the appearance of God as human beings, we're going to be that different than from what God appears? Because why wouldn't he make us similar to himself? I didn't know what to say to that because I'd never heard it before. Anyone got something? Because someone was saying, okay, he is a spirit. So this whole comprehension of what God is like. But for someone to say, would we be shocked to find that he's somewhat like us or appears similar to us or something like that? Because why else would he make us the way he did? I digress, but I'm just thinking that brought it to mind when we talk about, many times it talks about the eyes and the hand of God, and we always just say that it's representative of God's power and omniscience, things like that. So no one has spent any deeper moments. Mark, you got something?
I was just thinking, we're made in the image of God. So that mean, what does that mean? Like a spirit or like physically or?
The image always has to do with the righteousness and purity, that without sin. But what you're saying, though, is what some others have said. What about if there's more to it than that? So, the idea, Cindy's got a good point. We haven't seen perfect yet, so how do we know? And so the speculation is probably a moot point. But just that someone brought that up once and said, maybe we got to be a little careful to say, that doesn't mean that we're not talking about looking like God. And I said, well, so I know what they're saying. So Cindy also has verse 1 down. The very first one we started with. A gentle answer, A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. I read that, it's actually in their first point here. We'll get to that I was wondering where that comparison was. Verse 25 brings out something you got to know a little bit about the culture to understand when we're talking about. And it says, the Lord tears down the proud man's house, but he keeps the widow's boundaries intact. The corners of an Israelite's property were marked with boundary stones. And dishonest people would move these markers to steal someone's property. And you have a couple of references in Deuteronomy that says, don't do that we ran across in our study of Deuteronomy. And it says, widows especially would be targets of such dishonesty. So if you can get out there and move the stone and say, well, look where the stone is, that's where it is. Now you got all sorts of computerized images and plans and everything to figure out where the boundaries are on property. But back then, it was where the stones were. So that's why it says he keeps the widow's boundaries intact, the boundary stones. So anyone have anything on those first two look sections? Let's go to our discussion. And it brings up that first verse that Cindy pointed out. Suppose you're in your car, another driver cuts you off. What do you naturally feel like doing? Lisa's got her video on, looks right at Jim right away. So, and what does verse 1 have to say about this? And I don't think this is like.
Well, that was probably more for me because a lot of times I'm honking at them and
Yeah,
might be saying things that weren't very nice.
I'm a pretty calm person.
pretty calm person by nature, and it's just the rest of us because. When I use it, it's probably even maybe a little bit more petty. Is if I think I asked once in a Bible class, how long do you sit behind a person that isn't moving when the light turns green before you give them a tap of the horn? And if you say over 5 seconds, I would be questioning whether that's true because, it's almost as if that person doesn't go in the first couple seconds, you're kind of getting antsy and want to give them a little toot, like, hey, come on. Especially if you see this where they're on their phone, you're kind of, come on, you're holding up everyone, especially if you're in a left turn and that light's going to turn, you're going to get stuck in that lane for another rotation. So Cindy said if they're looking down right away, no patience at all. And I think if they are looking down, it's a different ball game. But here it says if someone does cut you off, and even if you don't even know if it was purposely or if it was accidental, Lisa said you feel like hitting the horn right away and just giving them that look. And I catch myself giving them the head shake, like I go, oh, and I'm thinking that's not very good. And it says, what does this verse 1 have to say about this? What do we see in verse 1? Not maybe the best reaction.
Depends on how much I lay on that horn, whether it's a gentle just tap, pay attention, or hey, you cut me off.
Well, hey, it's a slugger that doesn't accept, correction, right?
Yeah. So I like what Cindy says. She says, wave and smile, and like, hello, and I don't know how often we do that though. How about you, Luke?
I think a lot of people, me included, their natural instinct is to go and cut them off and, return the favor, but then that can just escalate. So maybe that's what they're talking about in verse 1, where if you let it go, then it won't escalate.
Yeah, exactly. Because it is a natural reaction that they have wronged us so terribly by cutting us off or whatever they did. And to give a gentle response, wow, I don't know how often we've done that. I try to give a gentle tap on the horn if they're not moving instead of like just full blown, blow them out of the front seat, but just to kind of like, hello, beep, beep, so they see. And I think on occasion, if I did pass them or get around, I kind of waved a little bit to try to let them know. I was just telling you didn't see the light change or whatever it may have been. Quiet gets more attention than loud sometimes when disciplining children. Well, Cindy, you weren't at the child care center today because nothing was working today. Right, Hannah? Was it one of those days or was it just me? Probably because I was doing Bible time most of the day with our.
Like I said, Pastor, they are zoned in when it's me.
I
so
do not believe that is true. With all my demonstrative teaching and interaction, I can't see how that's possible.
Yeah, you only have one picture. I have like 10.
Because I play out the story. I don't need pictures. I'm so illustrative in just the way I present the story. So
you should have brought out the Band-Aid again. That's a win.
No, it's been my haircut for a couple of days. I think they're finally getting used to
the haircut.
Yeah, that. So far, Blake Bannock.
We're dealing with weird weather front too. So.
Yeah. No, they were a little rowdy today, but I digress. Let's go on to the next one. Number 2, how does verse 3 contribute to instilling us the fear of the Lord? And I'll just bring that up. Verse 3 says, the eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked. And then that part it says, and on the good. How does that instill the fear of the Lord? Anyone thinking on that?
You can fool some people, but you can't fool God.
Remember our mothers who had eyes in the back of their head, Cindy says, yeah, isn't that something how they always knew stuff? And how did you know that? How did you see that?
They have to be accountable.
I think
Am I looking at it wrong?
I think when I look at that idea that when I teach confirmation, is God's omnipresence comforting to you, or is it cause you to fear a little bit, trying to get the kids to go through that same thought process that knowing he's always there is very comforting, or should be. And along the same line, omniscience, all-knowing, knowing everything is probably a better thing, that he's all-knowing. Is that a good thing, or is that a bad thing? And the kids kind of get it after a while, that if he does see also when you're not living such a godly life, that can be kind of awakening too. So he knows everything, and there's that judgment that comes. So anyone else on that one? What is, and this is verse, I believe it's verse 6. That doesn't say here on my sheet. What is the treasure in the house of the righteous, and why does the income of the wicked merely bring them trouble? Yeah, verse 6. The house of the righteous contains great treasure. First of all, the question is, what is that treasure in the house of the righteous?
Faith?
When you see that word righteous, you're thinking, okay, this is talking about those who are spiritually right before God, and so you would say faith. Cindy agrees, godly living or faith. And kind of what goes along with faith too, the confidence, peace, just knowing you're going to be okay, I think. And so that verse kind of means something there too. Blessings too, yeah, Cindy. So kind of great treasure which the world does not know of. And then you look at the second part, it says, why does the income of the wicked merely bring them trouble? It says the income of the wicked brings them trouble. How come?
It leads them even further away from God.
Yeah, you don't have that tranquility. You don't have the God's blessing. And what do the wicked use their money for? Satisfy cravings, counter the saying that money can't buy happiness. They think that can do it. But, as much as they spend, they're still not going to find any satisfaction. They're not going to find any fulfillment. Only fool themselves into temporary pleasures that don't last and don't provide that. So there again, that contrast between the righteous and the wicked in verse, that was verse 6. There it is. Okay, let's go another one. Oops, where's my worksheets? How does the Lord view people who are religious? In other words, offering prayers, sacrifices, and offerings, but continue to live in unrepented sin? And it gives you the reference of verse 8. See verse 8 on the screen here. Whoops, I got them all. Kind of a strong word. What does he say there in verse 8?
Well, I like the EHV. They have a footnote that says, abomination can also mean it's disgusting or repulsive.
Yeah, the detesting and repulsive abomination, disgusting. Even if they're appearing to be religious and on the outside they look good, seeming good works, which aren't good works at all, they mean nothing to God. Detest something. That's a pretty strong word. Do you think I'm trying to think of a situation in life when I've ever used something like that word that strong, because it doesn't mean I don't like. It doesn't mean I'd rather not. If you detest something, almost makes it sound like that's the last thing I would do is do that or try that or sample that. No, I detest it. It's a strong word. So kind of fits right here, that abomination. It's disgusting too. That's where it's kind of the same mindset there. So,
or repulsive, it's kind of like make you want to just turn around and walk away. It repulses you. You just,
yeah. You're almost like a bad smell. You want nothing to do with it. Cindy reminds us it was Cain's offering that God would say that he did not accept Cain's offering. The same thing. He was one who looked religious because he was being a good soldier, being a good believer, offering sacrifices just like his brother Abel, but God knew his heart, and he was only doing it because he felt he had to, or for whatever reason, look good in front of others, but not sincere. Next one. What do verses 16 and 17 teach us about striving to acquire wealth? We go to verses 16 and 17. Better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. Better, and then the one Luke's favorite, better a meal of vegetables where there is love than a fattened calf with hatred. And again, the question, what do these verses teach us about striving to acquire wealth? With the disclaimer, there is nothing wrong with wealth. There is nothing wrong with acquiring wealth and using the best of your abilities to acquire wealth. But where's the problem in these verses, Luke?
The priorities. If you're putting wealth above the fear of the Lord, then that's where you get into problems.
Can make a pitch for our Sunday morning Bible class that I'm going to archive tonight, and that we just started on idols, and one of the major ones is wealth, and how it's brought out that there is nothing wrong with being wealthy. That's not a negative thing. That's a blessing from God. But the whole thing about having something become an idol is when you elevate something good or bad, or I should say bad or good, to being more important than God, which you said with priorities. And so the Lord and his loves has to be towards the top, and without it, it has to be at the top. Otherwise, you get that hatred and turmoil. Anytime you have an idol, something more important than God, it's going to be turmoil. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be problems. So anyone else on those two verses besides showing you that vegetables have never been considered to be a good thing? Right, Luke? Is that what it's saying? That's what Luke got out of it anyway.
I think it's pretty clear.
You don't want to mess with it. Several verses in this chapter, and take a look at 10, 12, 31, 32, refer to the ways a person reacts to correction. Summarize what they say. Any of those verses, just give me a brief summary of what you think those verses are saying. I'll let you look on your own. 10, 12, 31, 32. You need the screen. Here's 10. Stern discipline awaits him who leaves the path. He who hates correction will die. A mocker resents correction. He will not consult the wise. And the last two, 31, 32. He who listens to a life-giving rebuke will be at home among the wise. He who ignores discipline despises himself, but whoever heeds correction gains understanding. Anyone got a catch-all little summary for all of those?
Something about pride.
What about pride?
You're so pride cometh before a fall. I mean, you're so proud that you can't think that anyone else can possibly do anything to make you better or help you.
If you chafe at any time someone tells you something, that's a result of pride. You know, you've got you just, no one's going to tell you you're doing something wrong, because in order to be humble, you have to admit that you make mistakes. You have to be able to admit that you do things wrong. Now, granted, we got to be careful how we approach people in pointing out their faults, and always doing it in love. There's really, I've been watching it on Time of Grace. Jeremy Maddock is one of the pastors, and this week they're doing their devotions. They're actually a little longer this week. It's this entire week is on homosexuality, and it's kind of been a little controversial just looking at some of the comments that are said. But his today was probably about 11, 12 minutes long. Usually they're less than that, about 5 minutes or less. But this whole thing was about how do we talk about it? And he brought up some good points that in trying to correct people, are we simply trying to win the argument, to show them that we as Christians are right and they're wrong, or are we acting out of love? And I thought it's a very well done series. You can find it on the Time of Grace site, I'm sure. Some of you might have it come up automatically on your emails, but there's different ones that maybe aren't as interesting to me. I just thought the way he approaches that is good, and it kind of fit in here too. That if you resent correction, turn it around the other side. If you're presenting that correction or offering that correction or discipline, let's be careful how we do it. And maybe our resentment comes from the fact that we take it in the worst possible way. Maybe someone doesn't mean any malice or harm or isn't trying to tear us down, but maybe our perception of it is what's coming out, and how we react. We're so quick to fly off the handle. What about those who do accept correction? What do those passages seem to be saying? And maybe I'll add my own question. How do you? What's the best thing you can say if someone has pointed something out to you and they're right, and you, in your humility, recognize they're right? What's the best thing you can say to someone?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And to say, hey, it's a tough thing. I'm self confessions here. For me to say, thank you, you're right. Wow, is that hard for us as people to say, you were right? Because we get so defensive. And even if it's just a shred of what we were doing was right, we try to hang on to that. And that's where, getting that passage again, humility comes before honor. We've got to, I think and I know I got to do it. Sometimes I just got to say, I was wrong. Hannah, without telling everyone how often I'm wrong, and you've seen it, but go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think sometimes it's not necessarily as hard for me at least, to admit that I'm wrong, but it's more so to be like, oh, I made a mistake. And to more so admit that, because I think there's more of that perception about what it looks like to other people when you make mistakes, rather than if you're just right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think right and wrong sometimes is more cut and dry, but when you make a mistake, owning up to that and just saying, wow, I made a mistake, I messed up, now I know going forward to learn from that and fix it for next time.
I have tried to instill in Vickers and also in my son that when you do something that obviously is not right and isn't very harmful, but it just isn't very smart, don't be afraid to laugh at yourself and just say, what was I thinking? Or just in some way let the person know, I realize I was wrong. And I hope that's not cutting through, just coming out and saying, boy, you're right, I'm wrong. And I do believe it's more that men have a harder time, because it's just a difficult thing for guys, because we're supposed to be leaders, and if we're questioned with it, and I tried in my marriage counseling say too that ladies, that we make a lot of mistakes. Well, most of the time we know we're making those same mistakes, and if you see that we fly off the handle, it's because you're reminding us of something we already know. So I think there's a big burden placed on some of our wives to you get to know your husband, how do I approach them about something that obviously needs some correcting? Someone else have any other examples of how to correct or how to receive correction, either one? Okay, good. Let's go to the last one. Some people always want to make sure they get recognition and honor for what they do. What's a better path to honor? And this kind of goes back to, we've been talking about this verse in verse 33. Fear of the Lord teaches a man wisdom, humility comes before honor. How does that help us answer the question, what's a better path to honor? And the answer is humility, but what does that mean? Make that practical for us.
Let someone else point out the good work that you do.
Yeah.
You don't need to bring it to attention by yourself.
Isn't it funny how we don't always recognize how obvious that looks when we're bringing it up, trying to draw attention to ourselves? That I mean, we see other people doing it and we think, wow, but then when we do it, it doesn't seem so obvious that, we have to put it out there and say something. But yeah, just, fear the Lord, be humble, let others notice, let them point out your accomplishments. When we talked one of the previous classes about, that idea of take the seat in the back and tell them, hey, you're supposed to be up front, rather than take the seat in the front and go, you're not supposed to be up here. That's kind of embarrassing. So anyone else? Got it, Phil. Last thing on this one. A man finds joy in giving an apt reply, going back to verse 23. And how good is a timely word? Just a comment on that, anyone? What's an apt reply and a timely word? How would you define those things? Kind of similar. We read that, and then we're thinking, okay, what does that mean? An apt reply, a timely word.
Giving due praise at the right time.
Very good.
Late after the fact for like a job well done, someone may have already had a chance to sit and stew about the fact they didn't get thanked or whatever, or be told it was a nice job.
Cindy had using tact with timing combined. Jim and Lisa?
Yeah, it goes back to well done, good and faithful servant. It just gives you that, even if it's the job that you're supposed to be doing, getting paid to do maybe, it still is just, it's nice to get that compliment. It just makes you feel like, okay, you're appreciated.
I know, and sometimes it comes with the position I'm in, but my vicars I think it became known, I didn't give my vicars a ton of compliments, and some of them pointed that out. And I still have a very good relationship with almost all of the guys that I had vicaring, but I still remember Carlos Lyra was one that brought it right out in a voters meeting saying, I've been here like 8 months and pastor giving me like one compliment. And I go, why was that even brought up? But he was trying to make some point. I just thought, well, thanks for that, Carlos. But Carlos had all the talent in the world and probably didn't need to be reminded of it. But just the saying too, a timely word. You probably appreciate a person that knows just what to say at the right time. And maybe you have someone in your life that does not say a lot, but when they do, everybody seems to listen. Hannah, your hand. I forgot about you.
I was just going to say that I think also the opposite, knowing when to address even a negative situation as well. Because like if in the heat of the moment, sometimes it's not always best to have that conversation or give a response, because it's not going to get you anywhere. Whereas when you have like good timing, you kind of, with certain people, you need to give them their space and then come back and talk about what happened and then figure it out. We do that a lot with some of the kids. Like if they are like they're past their point of like reasoning with them, you have to just get onto something else. And then once they've calmed down, then you go back and you talk to them about what happened. And you talk them through, okay, what are we going to do to make this better next time? Because if you try to talk to them in that moment, it's only going to escalate the situation.
Yeah, the timeliness of it, you have to recognize that, especially with children, that the younger they are, if they're not going to be listened in the midst of throwing a fit or expressing themselves. And so, yeah, it's just a good verse 23. Others that have anything? I want you to look on your worksheet for lesson 16, just to look at verse 1 before we start reading, because there's what I had reference to, how kind of a little bit change in format. Change in the way the Proverbs were stated in the next 7 chapters. Beginning back in chapter 10, almost every proverb was presented as a 2-part contrast, with the second line expressing the opposite thought of the first. From chapters 16 to 22, actually after a couple of verses, it starts. Almost every proverb will be presented with the second line repeating the thought of the first, which is just kind of a neat thing. We got a different shift in how Solomon presents the book of Proverbs. So Going on then to chapter 16, 33 verses here. To man belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the reply of the tongue. All a man's ways seem innocent to him, but motives are weighed by the Lord. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. I'm already going to say that's one that I've seen on plaques or on framed things sometimes in some people's desks. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. What a wonderful promise. 4, the Lord works out everything for his own ends, even the wicked for a day of disaster. 5, the Lord detests, there's that strong word again, all the proud of heart, the arrogant. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished, even though at times we think they are going unpunished. 6, through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. Through the fear of the Lord, a man avoids evil. When a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies live at peace with him. I think we talked about that one. 8, better a little with righteousness than much gain with injustice. In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. The lips of a king speak as an oracle, and his mouth should not betray justice. Honest, and some of these verses all kind of have to do with kings here, this whole section here. Honest scales and balances are from the Lord. All the weights in the bag are of his making. We talked about how they carry these different weights in their bags. Kings detest wrongdoing, for a throne is established through righteousness. Kings take pleasure in honest lips. They value a man who speaks the truth. A king's wrath is a messenger of death, but a wise man will appease it. When a king's face brightens, it means life. His favor is like a rain cloud in spring. How much better to get wisdom than gold, to choose understanding rather than silver. The highway of the upright avoids evil. He who guards his way guards his life. Verse 18, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Better to be lowly in spirit and among the oppressed than to share plunder with the proud. Whoever gives heed to instruction prospers, and blessed is he who trusts in the Lord. The wise in heart are called discerning, and pleasant words promote instruction. Understanding is a fountain of life to those who have it, but folly brings punishment to fools. A wise man's heart guides his mouth, and his lips promote instruction. Pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. 25. And if this sounds familiar, because I think we had it in chapter 14, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Must bear repeating, must be that important. 26, the laborer's appetite works for him, his hunger drives him on. So we'll talk about that one. 27, a scoundrel plots evil, and his speech is like a scorching fire. A perverse man stirs up dissension, and a gossip separates close friends. A violent man entices his neighbor and leads him down a path that is not good. He who winks with his eye is plotting perversity. He who purses his lips is bent on evil. Here's my needlepoint one that someone has to do for me. Gray hair is a crown of splendor. How about any hair? I'll take any hair as a crown of splendor. It is attained by a righteous life. 32, better a patient man than a warrior, a man who controls his temper than one who takes a city. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. Which wall plaque verse do you guys find there? Any of those verses that stood out that you said, yeah, that you've either seen it or you say that's one that says a lot, and I could use it as a motto at times, kind of what we get out of the book of Proverbs. Anyone stand out there? Can't choose the gray hair one. I already chose that one.
Like I brought up before, I think 18 I've seen on plaques or what about pride leading
Pride
to your
goeth
fall.
before the fall. Is that how it's usually shortened? Pride goeth before the fall. Yeah. That's a warning there. Cindy had one. Verse 9, she sent it to Sadie when she was in boot camp. Whoops, verse 9. I'm trying to get to verse 9. In his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. Yeah. How does that relate to your daughter, Cindy? Just because of how he's going to work everything out? Is that what you kind of had in mind? I know you're just in the chat room with us. He knows. Oh, okay. Let's see. I got to get right down here. Oh, also verse 3. Found a lot of good Proverbs down there. So verse 3, commit to the Lord, whatever you do, your plans will succeed. Yeah, both of those kind of go together. And then verse 9 is bringing it out a bit. You can plan your course, but the Lord's going to finally determine what steps to take. So,
Lord, you know,
yeah, that's good.
a lot of practice.
Who else has one? Anyone else have one you like?
Well, 8's kind of repeating the vegetable verse. Kind of the same intent.
Better a little with
Better a
righteousness
little.
than much gain with injustice. Just leaves out the food reference, right? Yeah, when you're talking about if you're just going to have a little, at least you get it the right way and not the wrong way and having abundance. Okay, let's go on to our sheets and verse that we have here. Verse 11 brought out honest scales and balances are from the Lord. I referenced that. I reminded you an honest merchant uses honest weights because he or she wants to do what is right in the Lord's eyes. That's what they would carry around. They had a bag that had the weights that were supposed to be right, and that's why honest weights are from the Lord, because that's showing that you respect and want to listen to the Lord. So go to verse 2. Explain it in your own words. All a man's ways seem innocent to him, but motives are weighed by the Lord. Put that into your own words. That I just lost it here. All a man's ways seem innocent to him, but motives are weighed by the Lord.
Eventually, you can justify your own actions through your own values and reasoning. The Lord is going to judge those actions by his values and reasoning, not yours.
I think you're right on with what I thought too, that when you said just we so easily justify our own actions. Lisa, Jim?
Well, I was going to say something similar, that, you know, because we're sinful, we look at it through our sinful ways and think, you know, we're able to justify, well, I'm going to do this and it'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the Heritage version, it says all of a person's ways are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs motive. So, you know, that, yes, I'm doing this and I have all my reasons and, you know, can convince myself and maybe others that what I'm doing is right. But the Lord is the final judge.
Cindy calls it rose-colored glasses. That, yeah, because we don't like to be told we're doing wrong, so we can put a spin on things. And man, we've become very efficient at doing that. And I kind of equate it to, it seems ridiculous, but we do the same thing, that you'll have a politician give a speech, but then they'll have the two parties will give their spin. You know, they'll give their spin on it, and they're both listening to the same speech, but you already know how they're going to spin it. You know, if it's their man that's giving the speech or woman, they're going to talk about what a great thing it was and what the country needed. And if it's not that party, they're going to say that was just ridiculous. And you just say, wow, that's so obvious. And then yet we say, don't we do that every day? That we'll say, well, the reason I did that, you know, I'm sorry, but, you know, every time you say an apology, I'm sorry, but, then you're trying to justify something. You're not really all that sorry if you're trying to say, but you got me upset, or you know the buttons to push, or whatever it may be. So, but, and then you get to the part two where it says God's going to be the ultimate judge to it. But let's be honest when we know something isn't right, and not try to put a spin on it and try to justify our own actions or think in our own mind that what we're doing is pure and right, because that's always going to be done. I read something today that everyone, you know, outside of Christianity, everyone thinks what they're doing is the right thing. There's not too many that come right out and say, I am doing something that is absolutely wrong. most people have made it in their minds to think no matter what I do, that's what's right. And if they're not using a standard of God's word, and if their conscience isn't as strong as it should be, it could be something that's obviously wrong, but in their own mind, they've convinced themselves. So they're pure in mind, at least in their own mind, but it says God eventually knows where the problem is. So. Number 2, what will happen when you put every undertaking into the Lord's hands? We looked in verse 3, and how does verse 4 support your answer? Verse 3 was the one Cindy mentioned. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. The Lord works out everything for his own ends, even the wicked for a day of disaster. So what will happen when you put every undertaking into the Lord's hands? And then look at the following verse that comes up. And first of all, it says, your plans will. Whoops, wrong one. Your plans will succeed. And I wanted, before we do verse 4, look at verse 9 though. In his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. I wish they would have made more of a tie down there, because it says your plans will succeed. That doesn't mean what though? Your plans will succeed
the way you look at success.
Yeah, isn't that I really like, because that's why I wish they would have tied verse 9 in there more so than verse 4, because verse 4 kind of does support it and says he works out everything for that thing, his goals are achieved. But your plans will succeed, but it might be where God has had to alter those, and that's where you allow that in verse 9. Mark and Paula?
I was going to say AHB, instead of saying your plans will succeed, it says they will be established.
Yeah, established too.
Spin on it.
Yeah, succeed. They'll be, maybe that's they'll be established, or they'll be in place. Maybe that's kind of leaving itself open to verse 9, that they might be changed. Established means they'll be in place. So that might be a hint of what they're doing. I'd have to look at the Hebrew word for that, but that's an interesting take on that too. And then the last part of verse 4, he even sets up the wicked so that disaster comes on them. So don't think the wicked are getting away with anything. That's also being covered. Other thoughts in verses 3 and 4? Going on to verse 6. According to verse 6, how is sin atoned for? Explain this as it might happen in a family situation. Who can make atonement for his or her own sins before God? Verse 6 says, through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. Through the fear of the Lord, a man avoids evil. Look at the first part. Through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. And we have to understand what they're driving for here. Just so you know that Solomon here isn't talking about being atoned for before, or being forgiven before God. He's talking about working between Christians. How do you atone for, and you look at the word there, at one. How do you make yourselves at one with someone after there has been sin involved? Maybe that's the best way to look at it, first of all. Because I really kind of answered the second one. We know only Jesus can make atonement, but how about when dealing with each other? And there's a passage I want to share with you with once we talk about it a little bit. How do you make things at one with someone as a fellow Christian when there's been sin involved? Whether you're the person that has committed the sin or whether that person has sinned against you.
Love that was modeled to you by Christ.
You forgive as Christ has forgiven you, so model that love. Anyone else on that thought? Because that's where we're going. Listening and forgiving, Cindy says, yeah. And how about the passage? It's from 1 Peter 4, verse 8. Love covers a multitude of sins. And I've heard people try to defend that in the wrong way. That means that, you just ignore sin. It doesn't mean that. What does the passage mean that love covers over a multitude of sins? Doesn't mean just forget about forgiveness. Doesn't mean forget about, pointing out a person's their errors for their salvation and for repentance. What does that mean that love covers a multitude of sins? I could preach on this then maybe sometime. You get what it's saying there? Love covers a multitude of sins.
If you love someone, you're more willing to not overlook, but forgive them for stuff. Maybe, I don't know.
No, you're on the right track. I love to think the idea that covering a multitude of sins means love throws away the scorecard. Love doesn't take inventory of sins. It doesn't keep track and say, I'm going to use this later. Or you think I did something wrong. Here's a list of things you've done against me. Because covers a multitude of sins. If you truly care for someone, you're not going to nitpick. You're not going to just look for their faults. And I've shared with you guys at times in marriage counseling, sometimes one of the simplest exercises is just to have people list down the things that they do admire about their spouse. And I actually stumbled upon that because I thought, wow, this is one thing that I've heard and tried years ago. And I've almost fallen back on it a number of times because to me, that passage was being violated because when people would come having some difficulties, it was all too easy to list the multitude of sins their spouse had committed against them that had completely covered up anything they admired about that person. And so to get that love just unburied a little bit, I've just said, I want you just to write down sometimes as little as 3 things that you admire about your spouse. And they don't exactly always write really fast to begin with, which tells me too, it's interesting when you watch people and just see their reaction. And so I just said, I'll wait, we have time, and then have them read them out loud. And just to see someone that maybe came in with so much hatred kind of almost transform a little bit when they start remembering why they married the person that they're sitting next to and just going over the things that they'd forgotten about. And that's why I really appreciate that Peter passage. And I think that's what's being said here, to atone for just between 2 people being loving and forgiving towards one another. And don't hold everything against a person when they sin against you, because you wouldn't want them to do the same to you. Other thoughts on that point? Question 4, how might verse 7 help you when one of your enemies is giving you a hard time? Verse 7 says, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies live at peace with him. When a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies live at peace with him. So how does that help you when one of your enemies is getting the best of you? I got to think a little on that one.
Am I doing everything? Go ahead, Anna.
I was just going to say that if you're doing what's right in the eyes of the Lord, they can't really say anything bad about you because you're doing what's right. Like there's nothing bad to that. So they can't say false things about you because other people see the things you're doing and know that you're a good person and that you're doing the right things.
Okay. Mark, you had something, then maybe I think up above. Mark?
I was just going to say, maybe it should make you think, are you doing everything you can to live at peace with your enemy, or are you urging on the conflict?
Yeah, why make a greater enemy by prolonging the conflict? Jim, Lisa, did I see you guys' hand up?
Yeah, I kind of think back to the verse somewhere that's, leaving the vengeance to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're a person that, maybe they do something wrong against you and you probably do deserve a payback, but if you don't do it and leave it in the Lord's hands to take care of it, people see that. They see how you react. They see how you, and it's a huge, people treat you different when they know that